I've had family stress, business stress. And I think one thing that I've learned throughout all of those bad lemon scenarios is that there is the greener side. There is a happier side of life. You just have to look for it. You're going to come and face situations in life that you're going to have to figure out how you're going to get through them. And they're going to be very difficult situations. And you can't just shut down and say, I can't do it, because I can't is not an option.
Last night when Rodney had to call and cancel, I thought, well, I'm just going to take a chance and see if Angie happens to be free. And she was so kind to jump in this morning and talk about her story and her lessons. Her book, if you haven't heard of it, is here. It looks like this. This is Angie with a bunch of lemons, which represents a lot of her stories, the lemons in life. A recipe for bad lemons, ingredients for success from life's sour moments. And it's really a fascinating story of resilience and determination and perseverance and faith. And I don't want to take away all of her story, but when you there's a few things in here really like with each situation in life, there's an outcome, and that outcome is a reflection of choices. Choices are fueled by many ingredients such as motivation, determination, ambition, and even commitment. If the outcome isn't what was meant to be achieved, then the processes along the way have to be changed, as well as the attitude towards the desired outcome. So that sounds like a motivational speaker who has all of life together. And you think, boy, she's got it made. It's easy for her to say. And then you read this book and it's just tremendous, the experiences Angie has had in her life. So Angie, I want to hand it off to you and let you tell a little bit of your story here.
Oh, thanks, Randy, and thanks, Mike Meyer, for getting me connected with all of you guys. As Randy said, Angie Hundley just had my book launched back in October, A Recipe for Bad Lemons, where basically it's just me capturing life, and each bad lemon is a chapter that I wrote about a situation in life that I personally overcome, starting out with my childhood, where I was in foster care for about 18 months. Prior to the foster care, I lived in a family, mom and dad, had two sisters, and my parents ended up getting divorced. And my mom ended up having a boyfriend that came and lived with my sisters and I. And
Uh-oh.
Angie, you're muted.
I accidentally muted you, Angie.
Sorry, am I there?
Oh, yes, I accidentally muted you. Sorry.
That's okay. So anyway, so he came into the room that night and pulled me aside and took me into the bedroom and introduced me to adulthood. And it was a very scary time in my life. I knew it was wrong. But when you're 6, 7 years old, you don't really have a choice when you're scared and you're being threatened with your life and your mom's life and your siblings' lives. And so my sisters and I endured, sexual and physical abuse for about a year before, thankfully, my sister's teacher caught on that something was going on at school, and kind of tricked my sister and I, pulled me out of class and said, hey, we talked to your sister. We know something's going on at home. And I just unleashed our family secret. And we ended up in the counselor's office that day, followed by foster care that evening. And that was where I got introduced to foster care. And me being the oldest, I have two younger sisters. Again, I was, I think 7 years old at the time, maybe almost 8. And my sister below me was 6. My other sister was 3. And I stepped into a motherly role that night. And which is crazy because I have a 7-year-old right now, and I look at him and I can't even imagine enduring that. But and when you're living in that moment, you just step up and do what you have to do. And so went to foster homes, bounced in and out for about a year and a half, ended up getting adopted in my 4th foster home. And prior to adoption, I would have supervised visits with my mom through through the foster care. And that was tough. My mom had a hard time believing what was going on with my sisters and I, and she was very adamant that we weren't being truthful. And so she ended up picking her boyfriend over my sisters and I, and basically just signed us over to the state. And that was tough. I hit rock bottom, 7, 8 years old, feeling very isolated, alone, suicidal. And when my mom kind of made that decision or was kind of unsure about what she wanted to do, that was difficult. And it was difficult for me, at the time. I lost my dad in the situation. I lost my mom, and then my sisters and I ended up getting separated and adopted in separate homes. And I think probably the most horrifying part of that was the separation from my sisters. And, I essentially felt all alone. And, I kind of had developed a little bit of hatred towards my mother and anger towards the situation, but losing my sisters, that was difficult. And that still goes on today with foster care. Not as, people don't understand that in foster care, the siblings get separated and it's very traumatic. It's one thing if you lose a parent, but when you have learned to rely on your siblings for support, that was very, very difficult. So I met with KVC about 6 years ago, and ultimately I met with KVC as a way of giving back, because I thought, I know in my heart I cannot be a foster parent. I would get too attached. I would want to fix everybody. I'm a fixer, and I can't fix every situation. And so we visited for a while. I brought my adoption book, shared it with her. We were flipping through the pages of my adoption book, and she was floored by the fact that the forms in the book were still the same forms that they give out to the children today that get adopted. And that just floored me that 25 plus years later, that the state of Kansas is still using the same forms for adoption. And so I went home that night after I met with her. Another thing she told me was that the success of foster children, success rate is 5%. And I think if I left that meeting, that was probably the most takeaway I got from that, was just the sheer shock of 5%, because there's a ton of people that have been in foster care or who still are in foster care. And I guess I just never really thought about that number. I never thought about what statistic I fell into being in that 5% role. Two of my sisters, one dropped out of high school. Actually, they both dropped out of high school. One got pregnant. Another one was partaking in drugs or whatever. And so I look at my own situation and I'm like, my gosh, I guess I never really thought about it. I woke up every day, go to school, plan my college, do what everybody else is doing. And I didn't realize that I was in a minority statistic. And so, throughout life, more bad lemon scenarios happen. I end up involved in a fatal car wreck. And I talk about that in my book, and I had to learn how to drive. And I basically had driving home late at night with friends, just as we all have done before. And I had a woman standing in the middle of the highway telling me to stop my car at 65 miles an hour, which everybody knows is not possible. And she ended up coming inside my car and flying over my car, and it killed her. And so then I had to learn how to drive again. And so that was a very, traumatic time in my life. And, I dealt with divorce. I have had, I got pregnant in college. I've had cancer scare. I've had family stress, business stress. And I think one thing that I've learned throughout all of those bad lemon scenarios is that there is the greener side. There is a happier side of life. You just have to look for it. And that's when I realized the gift of the power of the mind, and just how incredible it is. And that if you want to sit and think about how life is unfair to you, or how you've been wronged, or you haven't been given something, then it puts you in a very angry and dark side of life, and you can't cycle it out. And it makes you very angry and bitter and resentful. And those are all attributes that I just did not think were what I wanted to be. I didn't overcome a childhood to be overcome with other bad lemon scenarios. And so I wrote a book about all these scenarios and how I personally overcame each one. And they're not easy situations by any means, but each bad lemon scenario I chose for my book, I thought could resonate with many people, in a sense, for maybe they have dealt with something that maybe they've spun in and couldn't figure out how to cycle out. And just basically describe my personal ingredient for overcoming each one of those scenarios. And probably one of the biggest things that I feel is important is perception. There's a lot of perception around what is normal or isn't normal about how you heal from something or how you process something. And the reality of it is, perception isn't reality. And reality is that we all go through life dealing with situations that overcome us. And it's perfectly normal. Just about 2 or 3 months ago, I had one of my neighbors commit suicide literally 2 doors down from my house. And I didn't really know the gentleman that well, but, going through everything right now with COVID and all the stress of just life right now, some people, they can't shake that feeling and they can't figure out how to get out of that overwhelming anxiety of whatever they're feeling in that moment, and to where that ending the life seems like the most reasonable out. And it's sad. And that really hit me because I remembered a time in my life when I was, 8 years old, and I felt that same feeling of being so lonely and afraid and scared and just not really caring anymore about what happened, that became an option or a consideration. And so I think for me, it's just important to grasp onto life situations and figure out, what it is that's got you down, what's got you bothered, and finding a way to tackle it and fix it and move on, because everything in life, can be turned around. It's just a matter of how much you want to turn around, how bad you want to turn it around. And, in the end, what the goal is that you want to have, and anything's achievable. It's just a matter of figuring out how you're going to achieve it. And so I try to instill that in my children, that life is not always roses. It's not all the reality stuff that you see on TV where everything's perfect. There's real life scenarios that affect people. And, you see people's pictures on Facebook or social media, and people portray the life that seems perfect, but that's not reality. And I try to educate my children in that, you're going to come and face situations in life that you're going to have to figure out how you're going to get through them. And they're going to be very difficult situations. And you can't just shut down and say, I can't do it, because I can't is not an option. And so the book for me was something I wanted to inspire other people into whatever situation maybe it affects them. But really, it's just about overcoming whatever fear, anxiety, stress you have, and that you can do it. Anybody can do it. So,
if you've got questions, type them in the chat and I'll open you up. First of all, Angie, you have all the reasons in the world to have not achieved anything. You have all the reasons in the world to have given up. And we live in a time where we're bombarded with those messages of can't, all the reasons why you can't, all the reasons that hold us back or inhibit our progress or ability. And there was an interesting part of the book where you said, after acknowledging all my reasons to be grateful, which is really phenomenal that you could come up with reasons to be grateful with the life that you had endured. But after acknowledging all the reasons to be grateful, I began formulating a plan to continue to surround myself with positive energy. And you go on to talk about detoxing yourself from the negativity and the bad relationships. And I think about what people are going through right now with the negativity on Facebook and Twitter and social media and the media in general and politics and how we're bombarded. But how did you muster that, not with a firm foundation to start from, but on your own to cultivate that idea that I need to surround myself with positivity and eliminate the negativity?
I think it was a matter of, I realized I was so consumed by it. You think about everything that you're hearing and you feel it in your body. And it just, I think even down to the relationship I had with my sister, my biological sister, I was constantly listening to the negativity that would come out of her mouth as, being a victim for her, which I was never the victim. I was the survivor. We're all survivors. But I recognized how she was the victim and everybody's trying to wrong her and everything's wrong. And you just look at everything in a negative aspect, and then you're just bitter and angry. And I started looking at some of my friendships I had around me, and the same thing. It's like people just want to take from you, but they don't appreciate you for who you are. And so often we get caught up in what someone didn't do for us, or what they didn't give us, or how they wronged us, instead of looking at how grateful they are for how they got to where they are. Which is crazy. I mean, you think you lose your job, and you might be upset by that. But the reality of it is, you had a job at some point, and you have skills, you have something that will resonate with somebody else. You have, you have a way to insert yourself into a different part of life. This is not the end of the world. And so I think I just learned early on that if you consume yourself around negative people and negative things, then it becomes you. If you surround yourself with positive people, positive energy, and not get so caught up in all of the negative energy, then you can cycle out of that stuff. I have to be honest, when it comes to like social media and news, and I reach a point where I kind of listen to a little bit, but as you guys all know, I mean, just with the current pandemic, from one station to the next, every perception, every opinion is so different. So for me, taking it all in, I don't even know what to believe is legit anymore. And so I kind of just tune it out. The reality of it is, nobody's really happy about wearing a mask, but we got to wear a mask, and I tell my kids when they get in the car, and I'm sure we've all had this moment where we have I call it the mask anxiety, where it's like, oh my God, I don't have a mask. And I tell my kids, I'm like, guys, it's like part of our underwear these days. You just got to pack it. You got to put it on. You got to put it in your pocket, and I don't understand it, but whatever it is, what it is, but I could sit there and be mad and angry and hateful about that, or I could just accept that this is where we're at right now, and we just got to move on with it, And I think so often people just get fueled by that initial feeling of why, and the why really isn't important. It's just a matter of, moving on.
Well, I loved what you said yesterday when we were talking. You said, with all I've been through, why would I be afraid about this?
Yeah, it's true. I was telling Randy yesterday on the phone that I had an interview the other day, and I had a lady ask me if I was a mask wearer. And I thought to myself, first of all, like that's almost asking somebody like how they feel about abortion, or what religion party are you? And I'm just like, that really is irrelevant, to what I feel. But in my mind, I'm thinking, I lived out of a box for 18 months. So if you're asking my opinion about whether I'm afraid about what's going on right now, no. Like, I was 7, 8 years old, not knowing where I was going to sleep at night, or where I was going to get my next meal, or, I didn't worry about having to wear a mask. So I just thought it was kind of funny that she wanted to ask me if I was a mask wearer. I'm like, really? Where can you go when you can't wear a mask? Honestly.
One of the things that's been in common over the years when I've talked to people, a lot of people who've been through tough times, one of the things they go back to is their foundation of faith. But almost always those stories come from growing up in a 2-parent home, going to church, having a faith background, and maybe they went away from it for a while. And then when adversity hit, they went back to that foundation. You didn't have that foundation, but there's a section in here, that day my faith had been restored, regardless of how that card got to Grace. And then to me, it became our alliance. That card remained by my bedside, was read nearly every night. After reading it, I prayed and asked for help during my lonely time. It wasn't long before faith carried me to a new beginning. That's remarkable in that you didn't grow up in a good environment or have a faith background. Do you want to talk a little bit about that story and just how you think you found that faith on your own?
Yeah, I tell you what, it's funny, as a child, even, before foster homes, I remember the church bus coming and picking me up and taking me to Bible study almost every week. And it's funny to think back to that, because it's like, here I had a mom that didn't really, she wasn't a good mother. I mean, she was abusive, you know, she obviously abandoned us, but somewhere along the line, she felt it was important for us to go to church. And maybe that was her babysitter. I don't know. but, but, you know, I've gone to church off and on, and, you know, obviously I have faith in my religion, in God. But it's funny because, you know, that story that you just talked about that's in my book was right after I'd gone through divorce. And you know, ultimately I made the choice to go through divorce, and it's not the easiest choice by any means. I recognize that forgiveness doesn't mean that I have to accept the relationship that I'm in. And so I made the choice to go through divorce, and it was still tough. You know, I was with my children all the time. You know, I think my oldest at the time was 6. I think I had a 3-year-old and maybe a baby at the time. And there was times when I was curled up in the fetal position, just crying because I missed my kids so bad, you know, because they were with their dad and I was worried about them. And it really, that emotion just consumed me. And, you know, I remember just being upset by it. And, you know, I was kind of a mess. And I didn't realize that my oldest daughter had been witnessing some of my emotional stress. And one night I was laying in bed and she brought this prayer card to me, and I looked at it, excuse me, and it was a prayer to Saint Teresa. And I don't know if you guys know anything about the saints. If you're Catholic like me, you know a lot about saints. But the Saint Teresa prayer card is basically a prayer that you say in the time of loneliness and need. And I started reading through this prayer card that she brought to me, and it literally like hit me. And it was like everything that I read in that card was exactly what I was feeling. It was exactly what I was going through. But there was a message in that, you know, you can cycle this out, you can get through this. And I don't know what it was about that card, but it did become my lifeline. And it was funny because I followed my daughter into her closet because I asked her, like, where did you get this from? And she said, I don't know, it was in the closet on the floor. And I looked up at the top of her closet, and I had kept a box up there full of like her, you know, baby stuff. And I think, you know, her baptismal stuff was up there. And I remember her getting that card at her baptism. And I don't know how it got on the floor, and there was no way she got up there. It's the weirdest thing I can never explain. I was talking to some nuns next door at the time that lived near me, and they said, well, you know, it was probably a message from God. Maybe they, you know, somehow got on the floor and they whispered in Grace's ear, like, you know, go take this to your mom. She needs this. And I don't really know, but in my mind, I had to believe that's what happened. And so I felt like it was a message for me, like, you're going to get through this. You just have to get faith. And so every night I read that card, said a prayer, and started a new day. And you know, everyone says it takes 21 days to form a habit. And I think I read that thing probably 44 days, or I don't even know how it was, but it worked for me. And I still have that card I pull out every once in a while when I feel like I'm a little overwhelmed or have anxiety, or just, you know, my brain just all over the place. So.
You know, there are folks on here that have been involved in issues like post-traumatic stress. Mike Kinney on here, he works, you know, with folks that are dealing with post-traumatic stress. You read a lot of what you went through, and you've had post-traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a lot of therapy that you dealt with after the car wreck, and just the fear of the whole car experience. What did you learn along that way that helped you cope with that stress and get it back in order?
You know, with the car wreck, that was difficult. I was a senior in high school, and that was the thing that I didn't write about in my book, which is even more crazy, is that, as you know, kids in high school, rumors and what everybody talks about, and I remember going to school and everybody was talking about how I killed somebody, and that just hurt me like no other. Like, first of all, I didn't kill somebody, you know, that the whole situation itself was just very, very terrifying. But so that alone was a whole nother aspect I had to get through. But you know, I started seeing a therapist, and really it was just talking through what I had dealt with, the trauma. I mean, I had trouble sleeping at night. I had nightmares. I couldn't even get into a car without, you know, having stress about something running out in front of me. And I remember my therapist telling me, this is a crawl, you know, walk, run, and you're not going to just be able to get into a car and get back to what you used to be. And it's okay. You can't expect that in overnight. And so I talk about it in my book, but my first dealing with it, my therapist convinced me just to sit in my car, and I sat in my car and just cried. And there was a smell in there that just drove me this, I can't explain it. It was god awful. My car, when the police had it for about 3 weeks, it sat out in the rain. And so there was like this moldy smell. And when I got it back, I associated that smell with the wreck. And I would smell that, and it just, I don't know, it gave me instant anxiety. But I started off just sitting in the car and crying. And then, I talked to the therapist some more. And so the next time she's like, hey, turn the car on. So I turned the car on, and it really was all about going through steps. And it was one step and then the next step. And it's just like physical therapy. You get into a situation where you've had surgery or a wreck or whatever, and you can't walk, like you can't expect to run overnight. And it was the same thing for me learning to drive again. And I started off, like I said, sitting in the car, went around the block, 2 blocks, 4 blocks, 2 miles. And then I slowly got to the point where I could drive again. Driving at night was probably the most difficult thing for me, because I was always paranoid that something was going to run out in front of me. And I'm not going to lie, there's times like right now in fall, I fear a deer running out in front of me, and I'm sure we all do, but it was just a matter of taking her advice and taking one day at a time, and overcoming that fear of what I was afraid of. And it took a while, but yeah, I definitely got there.
Well, let's talk about some of the cool new things. You're a co-owner of a business, but
Yeah.
prior to that, you were telling me that you were involved out at Fort Leavenworth in a veteran historian project, which I think is awesome. And there's several folks on here that made passes through Fort Leavenworth. Any stories from that come to mind of just people you met in those interviews?
I started off doing a knowledge management project, and it's funny because when I was going through my divorce, I decided I needed to get a job because I was going to be on my own. And I went to a career fair, and I met the regional director, and him and I visited. I had never been in the military, wasn't really married to the military, didn't have any knowledge of the military whatsoever. And somehow this regional manager just gravitated towards me and was like, I got to get you hired on. And I mean, I got a packet of paperwork and, urine tests, all that stuff overnight. And I remember I went in that Monday for a job interview with some colonel, and he was like, I don't even know what I'm interviewing for. You have no skill sets that match anything. And so I ended up working on this knowledge management project. And basically I was the conduit between some of the proponents on the fort and our IT department. And I would go in the fort, and I would, talk to these guys about their intranet and all the different ways they wanted to build their knowledge web-based. And I would go back to my IT guys, and I would explain to them, okay, this is what they're wanting. This is how they want their website built. And then they started teaching me how to write code. And it was the weirdest thing. Like, my brain's just not wired for IT at all. And I'm sitting there next to these guys, and I felt like I was watching Ben Stein with dry eyes, clear eyes. And I was like, oh my God. And I did that for a while. And then finally my regional manager one day, he was like, hey, how's the knowledge management piece going? And I was like, well, honestly, it's like a dry martini. I'm choking it down, but I'm really hating it. And so he was like, oh, wow. So let's get you moved into something else. And so what happened was they ended up bidding on a military historian project, and it was interviewing the military officers at the CGSC college on their combat experience in support of global war on terror. And so what I was doing was I was basically interviewing them on their experiences and all their deployment efforts, from pre-deployment, deployment, and redeployment, and reintegration and so forth. And I was capturing their interviews. And then I had a team of transcriptionists that were transcribing them, and we posted them onto the Carl, the research library. And, the first day I went in to do my first interview, again, not having any military experience whatsoever, I had this officer sitting in front of me, and he started rattling off all these acronyms. And I remember sitting there going, what in the world is this guy talking about? I mean, it was like acronym after acronym after acronym. And again, talking about, you know, bad lemons, I guess. I sat there and I felt like the biggest idiot trying to figure out what the heck this guy was saying to me as I was interviewing him. And he left that interview, and I remember talking to the colonel in the building, and he was like, and I was telling him about how this guy was rattling off all these interviews, and I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. I felt like he was speaking a foreign language, and he was like, oh my gosh. He was like, you know what? We don't even know what these acronyms mean. We just speak them. He's like, just tell your interviews when they come in to expand on these acronyms, and that way you can help understand it. And so I took his advice. The next interview came in, I sat down and wrote down, I think 30 or 40 acronyms, literally, like the Army speaks in acronyms. And after the interview was over, I asked the officer, I was like, okay, so, you know, you said MRE. So what did you mean by that? And he was like, oh gosh, I don't even know. It's that thing that you do, that you eat when you're, you know, like, and I started to realize that they don't even know what the acronyms mean. And the colonel is right. They just speak in code. So it was fun. I met a lot of great people. I interviewed almost 700 officers in the 5 years I did that project. And it was a very big project for me. Again, not having any prior knowledge about the military, getting to learn the efforts that go into deployments, that goes into, you know, the pre-deployment, the reintegration, how it affects families. Again, you know, I interviewed some guys that had PTSD, and, you know, I sat across the table from these officers for about 30 to 45 minutes. I had guys that were crying to me. I kind of feel like I was their therapist in a way. And I'd have guys after the interviews, even females, that would tell me that it felt good to talk about some of the things that they hadn't talked about or hadn't shared before. And so that was kind of neat. I remember the first time I had an officer tell me that it snowed in Iraq, and prior to that, I had heard all about the blistering heat, you know, 120 degrees and hot and desert. And so I remember when the guy it snowed in Iraq, I thought, my God, it snowed in Iraq. That's crazy. And then I heard it 7 times after that, and it was like, okay, yeah, it snowed in Iraq. But it was interesting. I served on the Council of Colonels. I helped with them when they were doing some of their leadership stuff, and it was really cool to learn a whole different aspect of you know, life and what our country is made up, and our freedom. And so it was really cool.
Well, let's go to some questions. Michelle, do you want to unmute?
Angie, thank you so much for sharing your story. Gosh, amazing things that you've overcome. And you've mentioned some of the things. My question was, you know, what did you do to kind of keep your mind calm throughout the years and all this chaos that you've been through? And I think you kind of answered some of the things since I typed the question. It sounds like your faith, being around positive people. Is there anything even maybe like on a daily basis? I mean, like, are you someone that meditates, or were there things like that you had to do to get through all these challenges?
I don't meditate. I do CrossFit a few days a week. I really think, and don't get me wrong, I have my moments too where my mind goes off, but I really think it's a matter of just training your brain to think about something, and then instead of allowing your brain to go down this path of why and oh my gosh, and then you're just like, oh, stop, I'm feeling it. Okay, what's going on here? And then it's just a matter of taking your brain and recycling it to a different direction. You know, I find it with my children too, and this has been really hard for me, but and we're all, I'm sure most of you are parents. You know, I've had my kids will come to me and they'll tell me something, and my immediate reaction is I want to lecture, or I want to, you know, I want to fix it. But then I have to remind myself they don't want to be fixed. And so there's been times when my kids come to me, I've done this thing with them where I'm like, do you want me to listen, or do you want me to give you advice? And sometimes it's like, no, Mom, I just want you to listen. And then I know I have to keep my tongue. I have to just listen, which is very difficult as a parent. But I think that serves with many things in life, that you just have to recognize when it's okay to grieve something, and when it's okay to, you know, process something, but at the same time, like, when's it time to move on, you know? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where I've been with it too. I just find a way to deal with it, and then just move on.
It's good advice for so many things in life, for sure. Yeah. Thanks, you. Michelle.
Let's go to Drew, and he's one of those colonels. You can test him if he knows all those acronyms.
It's been a little while. Don't test me.
been a little while for me as well. You know, I really appreciate you sort of sharing with us. Coming from somebody who's been through pretty much a lot of trauma, I think it's something we all need to hear, especially people who have been through trauma. But really, anybody who has been through some hard times needs to hear on a regular basis. I think my question, you've already answered it, but one of the things when I talk to a lot of my guys who have been through some of these things, and I share with them how often I go through lows in my own personal life, they are shocked by it. And so that was really the reason I asked you that question. How often do you go through lows? Because I think most people think, you know, I love when my guys tell me, you know, you seem like you got it all together, and I don't. I'm a mess most of the time. I just say that in my mind. But you have said so many of the same things that I've heard from people who have experienced different kinds of trauma, the bitter versus better. Ironically, you talked about being consumed. I said this years ago to my guys who were experiencing a lot of things in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is you have a choice to let those experiences consume you or define you. So when you said that, it just resonated. So how often do you continue to experience these lows on a daily basis like I do? Because I think people need to hear that we always have these ups and downs, and the trauma, does it help you get through those lows? As opposed to what I think most people think the trauma actually creates the lows, but I was curious your perceptions and all that.
You know, I think I'm human in that I'd say, I mean, I have 4 kids at home, and, you know, I run a business, I'm doing my book promotion, and now I'm assistant teacher right now. So I think anybody who has even, you know, half of my load probably would have a low throughout the day at some point. And I'll have my kids sometimes look at me and they're like, the mean mom's here. But no, I think and sometimes I even give my kids a prelude, like, hey, the mean mom's about to come. And they're like, oh God. You know, I'm not gonna lie. I have my lows probably once or twice a week. And you said it best in that, you know, we all have them. One of my dear friends, and some of you might know Daryl Rodrock, him and I ironically grew up in the same city in Kansas and have kind of shared some of the same background. And we both talked about how we both have our days where it seems like the world is just like a mess. And for me, I feel like it's gloomy days, like when there's no sunshine, it's just like, my God, what is going on? And for me, you know, I'll go do a CrossFit workout, or I'll maybe put on some good jams or something, you know, something to kind of cycle my mood a little bit. But it's definitely, you know, I'd say at least once or twice a week, I have that downtime. And sometimes it's just a matter of realizing I just need to be by myself, you know, like I need to decompress a little bit and just go and just have some moments to myself, and not have, you know, all these people needing or wanting, or, you know, just take a breather, you know? So yeah. And I'm with you, Drew. We all have those days for sure. It's very, very much, there's no perfect days, I'm sure.
Let's go to Mary.
Angie, thank you so much for sharing your stories. We have some similarities in some of those spots. So I was just like, yes, girl, you made it. But here was one of my questions, because I know what I've had to do for myself to keep me kind of rolling along in the right direction. Share with us a little bit of anything you're doing for self-care, or any self-care habits that you're doing that's like, okay, when I catch me, here's a few things that I do to try and keep Angie, even when me mom has to come out, you know, on track.
You know, I mentioned earlier, CrossFit, I exercise. So sometimes and it's weird because I don't really want to go exercise, but I know I need to release some of the tension. And, you know, I will go for a walk. Sometimes I'll do that, but I don't, I feel it coming. I feel it in my chest a little bit, and I know it's anxiety, and I think we all feel it. Maybe we don't all know what it feels like, but it's anxiety, and sometimes I just have to stop and think about, okay, what has got me so, twin right now? Like, what is it? What's got me wired? And then I'll sit and think about it. I'm like, you know what? I haven't eaten lunch, or I haven't really slept very good. So it's like, sometimes we get so consumed in what we're doing that we kind of don't take care of ourselves, and I'm sure we're all guilty of it. I mean, there's been days I've just run nonstop, and I'll have a headache, and then I'm like, I haven't really drank a whole lot today, it's just, but I think we just forget to listen to our bodies and why we feel the way that we feel. Like, there's something generally that's underlying. Maybe you need to sleep more, maybe you need to exercise, maybe you need to, eat more different vitamins or water, whatever it may be, or just have a drink. I don't know. We all have things that we need, just have to figure out what it is.
Thank you.
I love your globe, by the way, Mary. That's really cool.
Let's go to Angie O'Keefe.
Hello. Thank you so much, Angie, for your story and sharing it. It truly is inspiring, and it is what we need to be hearing right now, definitely. My question kind of pertains to your adoptive family. I mean, how did that transform you? Was it that a good situation? And maybe you touched on this in the beginning and I missed that, but yours versus maybe your sisters, did that, you think, help in some of your success along the way, the difference in the environments?
It's really funny because, as I said, the three of us got adopted in separate homes, and my two sisters, one got adopted into a military family, and then the other one got adopted into a family that her mom was a child psychologist, and and then her dad owned a business in the small town in Kansas. And so they, in terms of like the family dynamic and what they were set up for, they were set up more for success than I was. I was adopted, my fourth foster home, she was a single female, never had kids, lived in a single white trailer house in a trailer park. And over the course of my time with her, she ended up meeting a guy and getting married. And of course they ended up adopting me, but they were poverty. My sisters were set up in middle-class families. And so when you look at the dynamic of what we were all put into, I feel like they were probably predestined to be set up for success more than I was. And again, they're the ones that dropped out of high school. And so I don't know, maybe if living in that environment maybe helped me appreciate the value of $1 and maybe motivated me to want better. I know from a very early age, it was like, I have to go to college. I've got to do all these things. I've got to cycle this out. And, and I know for them, neither one of them went to college. I was the only one that went to college. And so I don't really know if, excuse me, if our families helped with that dynamic or not. But when it came to our families, I think they were definitely the ones that had the means, had the funding, had the resources where I did not, to move on to college and so forth.
I think I remember in the book, your family was so destitute, you actually left and went to live with one of your sisters for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. My sister that lived, and that's how I ended up in Leavenworth, because her dad was military. Yeah, right before my high school freshman year, my sisters and I, we got adopted in separate homes, but it was neat in a sense that our parents kept an open adoption for us, and that we could all communicate, write letters to each other. And I have in my adoption book I have right now, it's filled with letters that we wrote to each other when we were kids, which is kind of cool to go back and read them. But we'd go see each other through the holidays sometimes, and then in the summers. And one summer, I was going to go stay with my sister in Leavenworth for the summer, and her mom aligned to get me in candy striping and volunteer work. I think I was on a softball team, since she knew I was going to be there for the summer. And during the course of that summer, my adoptive family had moved to a different town. And even when I'd gotten adopted by them, we had moved a couple of times. As a kid, I'd moved a lot. And I think there was a point where I'm like, I'm just done moving. And here I was already in Leavenworth with my sister and was meeting friends, and I got to be with my sister again. And so my sister's mom said, hey, if it's okay with your adoptive parents, we'll try to get you to stay here. And I begged and pleaded, and they ended up allowing me to stay with them. And I ended up staying with them the rest of my high school career. During the course of that, her parents ended up going through a divorce. So as a child, I got to witness another divorce through my sister's parents. But that's how I ended up in Leavenworth. Yep.
So go to Travis.
I think he's muted.
About now.
There you go.
Good. Thank you very much for this information. I can certainly relate to a lot of the things you said. Going through in the last 3 years of my life, going through divorce, going through significant job change, just a lot of rapidly evolving situations in my life over the last 3 years. On the uphill swing now, for sure. Have met a lot of amazing people, particularly on this leadership Zoom that we have every week. But through this process, and my kids are older, 21 and 18, but I don't see them every day like I used to, and I have felt like I've lost my sense of identity through all of this process. And so I asked my question because I'm relating it to myself and my own experience. Because my identity was in my job, my career, my father as a husband, all these different things. And now it's kind of lost in that mess, and I'm trying to recapture that. Was that a process for you, or was there like a defining moment, or maybe how long did that take for you to kind of capture your sense of identity and who you were as an individual versus because a lot of times I find myself identifying myself with other people as opposed to my own individual identity.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a very good point. And that's one of the chapters I talk about in my book about, removing toxic relationships. And I started realizing that I was gravitating towards people that were bringing me down and not lifting me up, including my own sister, my real sister. And there was a point where I want to say I was miserable, honestly. I felt like I didn't have a purpose. I was depressed. I will openly admit that. I even took anxiety meds because I was having trouble just with every day. Just everything angered me. I just felt like I was on edge with everything. I think my redefining moment probably was when I sat down and I realized, the friendships I had, what am I getting out of these friendships? The relationship I'm trying to exhaust myself with my sister, I'm constantly walking on eggshells around her. I can't say anything right, and I can't be who I am. I can't be true to myself. So why am I so hung up on maintaining this relationship with her that isn't healthy for me? And I think I looked at it like, she's my sister, she's my blood. We have to have this relationship. But the reality of it is, I don't have to have it if it doesn't work for me, if it doesn't make me feel good about it. And if I have to watch everything I say, or if I have to think in my mind, okay, how am I going to say this? It's not going to upset her. Then I'm compromising my own feelings and my own emotions to please somebody else. And I'm not true to myself. And I think I started looking at my friendships and the relationships I had, and I did a clean house. And I know it sounds crazy. People are like, you don't speak to your sister, but the reality of it was doing nothing for me. And I think I was trying to bring her along and try to fix her and help bring her success and help her see where the success was, but she didn't want to see it. So in return, she wasn't happy with my success either, and made me feel guilty about where I was in my life. And I started recognizing that it wasn't healthy for me and it was holding me back. And so that's when I did my clean house, and I weeded out a lot of friendships, a lot of people around me that I felt weren't prepared to bring me success, weren't lifting me up, weren't guiding me in the direction I needed to go, and was holding me back. And so I think for you, as you're going through all these life changes, which again, I've been through some of them, focusing on things that you're missing out on right now. And there's probably things that you should focus on that you can capture. And I mean, as I look at you, Travis, being very open, you're a very handsome guy. I think you probably have a lot of great qualities that maybe you don't see in yourself right now, but others see in you. And you have a lot of things you probably can project to other people that maybe are masked at the moment. But everybody's got a purpose, and you said figure out what your purpose is and what makes you genuinely happy, and you can project that to others.
Thank you. That's a really, really good answer. I really, really appreciate everything you said. I listened to actually on the way into work. I hate to capture all this time, but I was listening to Focus on the Family, and there was a marriage therapy couple on there that was talking about different types of intimacy personalities as it relates to relationships and why couples have such a hard time understanding each other. And a lot of it goes back to childhood rearing and how the brain develops through that. And I know exactly what type I was when I heard this, and I watched the YouTube video on it again. It was talking about different types of ways we respond to people, and how we get our identity is through other people. And it doesn't make sense to like that. And that's the whole perception thing. It doesn't make sense. Why are they reacting that way? Because that's not the way I react.
Mm-hmm.
The avoider versus the people pleaser, so to speak, right? The avoider had significant childhood trauma. Therefore, when conflict arises, they run. They don't want to confront it. They want to run. And then the people pleaser doesn't understand that. So they want to go try and fix that and make everybody happy. So it's just interesting to hear that. And there were several other vacillator and conflict avoider and just different types of things. But it was really interesting because that kind of is a segue to a little bit about where I was going with my question and what you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you.
It's interesting too, because I feel like you talk about that being the runner, the avoider. And I'm going to be 100% honest. I am that. I'm the runner. I'm the avoider. And it's taken me a long time to recognize that it's not fair to the other person to at least allow them the opportunity to say what they have to say and just listen. And it may not be what I want to hear. It may not be what I agree with by any means. But I've found it in myself. I don't like conflict. I don't want to sit and fight with somebody. I don't want to hear somebody fight. In my own children, when they fight, it drives me crazy. I'm like, oh my gosh, I used to make my kids sit on the stairs and hold hands and tell each other 5 things they loved about each other. And it's funny because they would sit there and my son, he's probably 6 and my daughter was 9, and like, I like your hair, and then they'd be squeezing each other and then it's like they would make fun of each other in a sense, but then by the end of it, they're laughing. And for me, I don't like conflict at all. And I will find any way I can to turn it around, or I will just remove myself from it. And I don't think that makes anyone a bad person, that they don't want to deal with conflict, especially right now with so much negative, energy just in the world.
It's mistaken as a male-female thing too. I think people mistake that as females generally speaking, will avoid and run, and men will pursue, or it could be, and that's just, but I don't think that's true. It has to do with, I think it has to do with how you were brought up, how you were raised, what interactions you had as a child. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, when it comes to like relationships, sometimes we get so hung up on losing a relationship that we think we need. And sometimes it's just generally toxic for you. And I've had to step back and look at something and say, you know what, this relationship, this friendship brought me this, it brought me, I can speak more freely now, and I'm grateful for that friendship, but that friendship's not what I need right now. Like maybe take the things in it that were positive for you, but accept that it's not what you need long term.
You're as healthy as who you surround yourself with.
Absolutely. I believe that.
We're about out of time, but there are a couple of great comments. Al had some comments that I think were great, or that I'd define as emotional intelligence, that was building on what you were talking about, understanding why people do what they do. And I think that's a lot of what you were getting on, and the root of this, of, why your sisters are different than you. Joe summed it up. You're a survivor. and your story really is one of survivor. Steve talks about all we can control is what's between our ears. and you have grasped that. Chris says you have grit, and that's for sure. You definitely have a story of grit. So I think there's something for all of us to learn. There's been a couple comments and messages here about the book. We put it in the comments. If you don't have it, it looks like this. I got it off Amazon. I'm sure there are other places to get
I have
the book as
I
well.
have a website, it's angiehundley.com. I've got some podcasts I've done and interviews if anybody wants to know more information about it. Also, a proceed of my book sales are going to Halo Foundation. And if you aren't aware of Halo Foundation, it's homeless children. And I think that was the non-for-profit that I chose to help, recognizing that I was almost homeless. If I didn't have a home that was grateful enough to adopt me, I could have essentially been homeless or aged out of the program through foster care and been homeless. So I'm donating proceeds from my books to help their foundation.
Well, that is awesome. Mike came up with a word I hadn't heard before. He says you're anti-fragile. So that's great.
Well, my kids say that I'm a non-coddling parent, and I hate that they say that. Like I have emotions. I have my breakdown moments too, but I just don't choose to sit and spin on it. It's like, okay, let's get up and move on.
The website, Nick is asking, what's the website again?
AngieHundley.com.
ANGIEHUNDLEY, all in one word. Okay.
That's
awesome.
Right.
Got it, Nick.
Thanks, guys, for having me on.
This was awesome, Angie. It's a great story. I hope people get the book and are inspired by your journey. And I know I was. Yep. And it just is a great reminder that we can go do what we determine we want to go do. We don't have to let circumstances define us, and you've proven that. And it's awesome that you're out there making a difference.
Thank you. Everybody can do whatever they want to do. They just have to figure out how to get there.
That's right. And take your mask. It's like underwear, you said. I'm going to remember that one now.
Take your mask.
Your mask is like underwear. So, okay.
Thanks,
everybody
guys.
have a great weekend. Enjoyed it, Angie. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
All right. Thanks. Bye.